All puns aside, is Africa the focus for global brewers at this stage? Do other brewers want a piece of this action?
Good morning, Stephen. It's good to be here. Basically, at the moment, you have 4 major players already playing in Africa. SAB Miller is obviously the SAB that we know of. You have Heineken, and then you have Diageo, which owns the famous Guinness brand, and then you have Castel, which is a privately owned French company. So between the 4 of them, they effectively have the market quite sewn up. Most of the mergers and acquisitions activity has already taken place in the 90s, when SAB Miller went into Africa and acquired a lot of underperforming, often government-owned brewers in countries such as Tanzania, Uganda, Angola. So I think lots of the first rush has already happened, and now what we're seeing is more strategic cooperation and seeing how we can actually compete in those markets. We have seen SAB tie up with Castel in some of the markets. They have joint ventures across Africa. And then we obviously have seen Heineken and Diageo working together in Namibian breweries, in Brand House in South Africa, and Guinness Ghana in Ghana. So already 2 distinct groups that you have of major global players. So there is not much space left for much expansion or for new entrants, in my opinion.
We do see little bits of activity or pockets of activity, such as in Ethiopia, where they are privatizing breweries there, and it looks like all of those players want a bit of the Ethiopian action. We've also seen SAB Miller expanding into Nigeria, and this is a market where it only has less than 5% market share, is really dominated by Heineken and Diageo there. Do you see this as a market that SAB Miller can actually make big inroads into?
Let me take your first question first. Ethiopia. It's in population size, it's one of the biggest countries on the African continent, but it has been quite closed economy. We have seen exchange controls, we have restriction on foreign ownership. So there has been a lot of speculation about entry into that market. There has been talk of privatization for about 5 years now. There have been sort of first entry players. Castel has already entered Ethiopia, and SAB Miller already operates a water bottling plant. Obviously, they would like to get into the beer business, but at the moment, the privatization process is still taking place. And we have the word that government of Ethiopia should privatize the 3 or 4 breweries that they own, so by the end of their fiscal year, which is June. So this is quite hopeful. We're not sure who is in the running. Definitely Heineken would be quite interested. East African Breweries, which is the regional player for Diageo, I'm sure they're also there on the bidding list.
Okay, and Nigeria, SAB Miller building a new brewery over there. It's built a little brewery there as far as I understand, but now it's building a bigger plant and spending $100 million on that. Can it really make a dent in this market that's already dominated by the other players?
It's an interesting one. SAB Miller Africa had a conference call last week, and they actually gave the reasons why they went to Nigeria. And the reason is they want to be in Nigeria per se as one of those markets which can support more than 2 players. Right now you only have effectively South Africa and Nigeria, where you have 2 big players with space to actually grow. In most of the other countries, they're dominated by one strong player, and then you have 1 or 2 importers or smaller producers. So Nigeria is one of those markets where the growth potential is so huge.
158 million people.
Yes, on the surface, I always do the calculations. 70 million Muslims don't drink alcohol officially, and then you have it's quite a young population. So when you actually take away the underage population, that market reduces. But I think it's still for long term. So on a 5-10 year view, you have to be in Nigeria, and I think that is the reason why SAB is investing $100 million in Nigeria. They had a very small operation near Port Harcourt. They have a small bottling business in Lagos, and now a greenfield brewery in Onitsha. I think it's going to be quite exciting for them, simply because it puts up the flag in the ground that we in Nigeria, we're going to take the fight to Diageo and to Heineken.
Tell me, East Africa, do you see a resumption of the beer wars, particularly in the Kenya, Tanzania markets? Because 10 years ago almost, we had SAB Miller and its rivals carving up that market, and SAB Miller really focusing on Tanzania. But it looks like it has its eye back on the Kenya market again.
Look, if the gentleman earlier talked about competition commission, if the deal was structured now, that definitely the carving out of the market between EABL in Kenya and Tanzanian breweries in Tanzania would have been definitely disallowed. So obviously the landscape is changing. I think there are factors to try to encourage competition. But what has happened is that the one leg of the transaction has been unwound, as you might know. EABL has purchased Serengeti breweries that was affected last year. So effectively, in Tanzanian market, you now have Tanzanian breweries owned by SAB Miller, and then you have EABL with its Serengeti breweries. It's quite a new operation in terms of operational control, but I think it will be quite a vibrant competitor. We have seen quite strong commitment by SAB to invest in that market. It's also 40 million people. There's lots of illicit brews, and I think that's where most of the growth is going to come from. But the more interesting one is Kenya, and I think that is a question on everyone's mind. Kenya is dominated by East African breweries, and SAB has announced that in December they bought a water bottling business. So they are making inroads into that market, but I think right now they are quite happy to have a 20% market share via a cross-holding in Kenya breweries. So effectively, why go and try to take on the dominant player when you're already having 20% of the market for doing nothing effectively?
Just quickly, before we say goodbye, any chance that we could see any of these large players merging with each other? There has been speculation before that SAB Miller could try to buy out Castel. Do you see any deals like that happening in the short term?
Look, last week SAB Miller denied it, but obviously rumors are coming up in the market on quite regular basis. I think the tie-up with Castel is quite interesting, as there is very little overlap. But I think there's also been rumors that Diageo at some point might be interested in selling Guinness. And the Guinness portfolio is at the moment is basically the British Isles and Africa. So if Heineken might be interested, or another player might be interested in the Guinness beer portfolio in Africa. So there's always those two different scenarios, but I think right now it's too early to tell.